Can you imagine get to the most iconic F1 team and discover that the car with which you dream has a hidden defect that ruins your season without anyone noticing it? Well, that is exactly what happened to Lewis Hamilton in Ferrari. And what you are going to listen will leave you ice cream? The story begins in Baku, an urban circuit of very high speed, closed curves and endless straight. A perfect scenario for a car demonstrate its aerodynamic efficiency and its energy recovery in extreme situations. But for Ferrari and Hamilton, it was the breakdown. What seemed another race in the calendar ended up revealing an engineering failure that could mark the fate of his season. And the worst, no one inside the team seemed to have anticipated it. After the Azerbaijan GP, Ferrari activated its post-carrier review protocol. This usual practice, where the car data is discharged, telemetry is reviewed and the pilot's sensations are contrasted with hard numbers, a disturbing truth brought to light. The SF-25 of Lewis Hamilton had suffered a sustained loss of power in its hybrid system, specifically in the MGUK, the component responsible for recovering energy in braking and returning it as additional acceleration power. The deficit was 2 kilowatts of power. For whatever F1 world, this may seem an insignificant amount. But in this category, where the tenths are the difference between pole and elimination, those 2 kilowatts translate into up to 4 kilometers per hour less in line. This condemns the pilot to be overcome even by cars with less aerodynamic load, and even more serious, leaves it helpless in DRS areas. Each advancement attempt becomes an uphill. Each defense, a lost cause. But the most alarming was not the loss of performance itself. It was the fact that this ruling had several races occurring in silence, without the telemetry warning it. The failure was intermittent, subtle enough to evade the alarms of the standard sensors, but constant to affect the performance in each lap. It is as if the car decided at random times, partially disconnect from the hybrid system. This not only compromises the career strategy, but completely destroys the pilot's confidence in his main work tool. Fred Vasseur explained it coldly at a press conference. He said that the problem was in the recovery of energy and that it was not consistent. But that was just half of the story. Internally, there was talk of a deep bug in the software mapping that manages the flow of energy between the MGUK, the batteries and the thermal motor. An architecture error. A failure that not only affects power, but also compromises the thermal stability of the system. The more the car was demanded, the more inconsistencies it generated. And the more he ignored, the more he deteriorated. What happened in Baku was the climax of a fault that had been managing from the preseason tests. But Ferrari overlooked it. Or worse, I couldn't interpret it. And this is where the real drama enters. Because Hamilton, at the wheel of that car, had been fighting with symptoms that he described as erratic acceleration responses, strange traction losses, and a disconnection between the engine and its power delivery. But those complaints were filed as simple sensations of adaptation. No one on the wall believed that there was a structural error behind, until it was too evident to ignore it. Baku was not just a bad result. It was the moment when the veil fell. And what Ferrari found under was scary. A systemic failure, a defective car in its nucleus, and a pilot who, without knowing it, had been competing with an invisible technical disadvantage. This is not just a technical problem. It is a betrayal of trust. And for someone like Lewis Hamilton, that is unforgivable. During the classification session of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, Hamilton expressly requested average tires for Q2. It was not a shy suggestion. It was a petition based on pure experience. He had studied the conditions of the track, analyzed the temperature trends, and knew that the soft compounds of Pirelli were going to overheat in the closed curves of the urban layout. Under these conditions, a tire that heats up above its optimal range loses drastically grip, lose traction, lose trust. The answer from the wall was blunt. The warming of the medium is too slow. We will run out of time. Not only did they ignore their criteria, they also questioned their ability to execute a quick lap with that tire. And the consequence was catastrophic. Not only they ran out of time, they also ran out of fuel. Hamilton aborted his return. Leclerc, on the other hand, did go out with the average compound and used it to eliminate its own teammate. We are not talking about a bad strategy here. We talk about a total disconnection between pilot and garage, of a fracture in the structure of trust that must unite the one who leads and to the one who decides. Because when a 7-time world champion gives you an instruction based on instinct and data, and you ignore it for what the software says or for fear of the stopwatch, you are telling him speechless. We do not trust you. The consequences of that decision are not limited to a bad result in classification. They damage something much more difficult to repair than a gearbox, the credibility of the team in front of its leader. From outside, Hamilton was serene. He did not yell by radio. He did not insult anyone. But the filtered recording of the conversation with his engineer Riccardo Adami says everything. With a firm tone, but without raising his voice, he questioned whether Ferrari is really ready to manage a pilot like him. He said it bluntly, "They can't continue making decisions that ignore the pilot's experience." That phrase may seem simple, but it is a direct shot to the heart of Ferrari's operation structure. Because what is questioning is not a tire choice. You are questioning a whole work system. He is saying, if you do not listen to the pilot who has won the most in history, who are they going to listen to? And this is where the situation becomes even more serious. Because this is not an isolated incident. In Australia, they had already ignored their recommendations on wet strategy. In China, communications were diffuse and late during the shot-out sprint. Baku was simply the breakdown point. The accumulation of ignored signals, of wrong calls. And now, Ferrari has a problem that cannot be solved with an aerodynamic update. These types of conflicts are not resolved with a technical meeting. They are resolved by rebuilding something that, today, seems to have lost: mutual respect. Hamilton does not need to tell him what a tire to use. You need to listen to you. That they trust that your experience is worth more than any spreadsheet. And in a season where Ferrari has a unique opportunity to fight for the title, being in internal war with his star pilot is a luxury that cannot be allowed. Because if they do not rectify soon, what began as a technical failure can end as an institutional disaster. And then the question will no longer be if Hamilton can win with Ferrari, but if Ferrari deserves to have Hamilton. Until this point of the video, we already know that the SF25 has technical problems. But the hardest truth is that these problems are not specific errors. They are not isolated breakdowns or unexpected failures of reliability. They are direct consequences of design decisions that were taken from the drawing table. Decisions that, hoping to find absolute performance, ended up compromising the operational integrity of the car. And that is the most alarming. When Ferrari conceived the SF25, he did it with a clear intention: to maximize the aerodynamic load in every centimeter of the car. The technical team, led by Enrico Cardile before leaving and continued by the internal aerodynamic group, opted for an aggressive design philosophy. They lowered the center of gravity, minimized the filming height, and worked with a radically optimized front suspension to generate more soil effect. In theory, it seemed a logical step. But in Formula One, each gain has a cost. When the car went down, they created an extremely sensitive platform to the irregularities of the asphalt. This caused two immediate problems: premature wear of the plank, the mandatory wood sheet that regulates the minimum height of the car, and an increase in aerodynamic rebound in closed curves. The SF25 in urban circuits like Baku literally played background. This constant contact not only affected aerodynamic efficiency, but forced the mechanical components to operate outside their ideal margins. But what really unleashed the crisis was what this design caused in the hybrid system. The MGUK, being mounted in such a compact and aggressive configuration, began to suffer temperature problems. Under normal conditions, the energy recovery system operates in a narrow thermal range, with sensors that regulate the conversion and delivery of electrical power. But in SF25, thermal oscillations were so pronounced that the system began to deliver energy erratically. Sometimes he delivered everything, sometimes he cut without explanation. This type of failure is not just technical. It is deeply conceptual. It means that the structural design of the car interferes with the functioning of its vital systems. What began as a search for absolute performance ended up sabotaging the internal reliability of the car. And this puts in check all the planning of the year. Ferrari designed the car to work in such a narrow ideal range that any deviation makes it unpredictable. And in a category where the conditions change every minute, track temperature, wind, pressure, moisture, having a car that only works inside a perfect window is a competitive suicide. It is not a racing tool. It is a technical trap. Internally, engineers began to refer to SF25 as the binary car. Or it works perfect, or does not work at all. There are no gray. And that kind of behavior not only destroys strategies, destroy the pilot's trust. And then the question becomes inevitable: how much more time will Hamilton endure in an environment that does not allow you to compete fully? Because while your contract is signed, contracts in F1 are wet paper when performance does not accompany and morals collapse. No one can rule out that, if the situation is maintained, Hamilton considers an early way out. And that would be a blow not only sports but symbolic. Because it would mean that not even Ferrari could live up to the commitment he demands to have Lewis Hamilton.